In the lead up to the George Floyd murder trial, we're looking at other cases that involve police officers on trial. Tonight, we continue our look at the case of Florida versus Nouman Raja, a police officer accused of gunning down a stranded motorist. Chanley Painter has the background for the case.
When he had the gun pointed at me around the car and everything, I fired him. He does this number, and I see his whole body spin, and I saw like a flash, a silver flash, like a metallic flash. Hey man, police, can I help you? And second,
That's Officer Nouman Raja in the brown t-shirt and jeans. Dressed in plain clothes, he was working a covert burglary operation. It's 7:30 in the morning, just 4.5 hours after the fatal shooting of Corey Jones.
And at which point, that's when he jumped back, and I saw him draw the gun right at me, right after I said the word police, and it was just like...
Raja is walking investigators through what happened, telling them Jones pointed a gun at him.
I remember pulling the trigger, I think 2 to 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
And he started running. And as he was running, I had my cell phone and I dialed, and I still remember putting my code in, and just like this, I had the gun, and I'm keeping an eye on this guy, and I put my code in, dialed 911, and I called dispatch right away because my radio was in the van. And the whole time, I'm like giving him commands, I'm yelling, screaming at him, I'm like, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun!
Corey Jones did drop the gun some 40 yards from where he collapsed. Prosecutors say he was running for his life and was no threat to Raja when the officer fired again. 3 more times, one of those shots ripping through his heart.
And all I could think was, my kids, man.
It may have been an open and shut case if it had not been for this woman. Madeline Tolliver answered Jones's call for roadside assistance.
And then I heard yelling and gunshots, and then yelling and more gunshots.
The call captured the exchange between Nouman Raja and Corey Jones, seconds before Jones was shot to death.
Stop. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
The call raised questions about Raja's story. Did he clearly identify himself as a police officer? And there was that 911 call that Raja said he made.
And I'm calling 911. Hey, this is...
Here, he says he made the call while he was chasing Jones. But investigators say that call came more than 30 seconds after the last shot.
Aim! And I bang, bang, bang. And I fired.
Those shots, prosecutors contend, were deliberate, calculated with intent to kill, evidence of attempted first-degree murder.
All right, Court TV anchor Michael Ayala joins us now with more. And Michael, so Raja gets convicted.
Yes.
Attempted first-degree murder and manslaughter, facing 25 to life. Tell us about the sentencing.
All right. Now, I do want to make a quick note here, Vinnie. With that conviction, and that came in 2019, Raja became the first Florida police officer convicted of an on-duty shooting in 30 years, since back in 1989. And the sentencing would come about a month later. Both charges carried minimums of 25 years to maximums of life in prison. At least a dozen members of Jones's family had been in the courtroom every day of the 8-day trial. Raja's family was also a consistent presence, providing support. His wife and brother were fixtures in the courtroom as well. Tensions were high throughout the trial, and when time came for the victim impact statements prior to sentencing, the results were understandably emotional.
Good cops are heroes. Nouman Raja is a criminal. He was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter with a firearm, along with first-degree attempted murder with a firearm. He committed these crimes while acting in an official capacity as a police officer. According to the evidence, he aborted his mission to respond to a fellow officer in need of assistance, and instead chose to confront Corey Jones and kill him for no reason. Afterwards, he lied and conspired to cover up his crime and blame the victim.
I will never forget during the court trial, seeing the images of Corey exposed body laying alone in the dark and at daybreak. Knowing that his grandparents lived just miles down the road and they would not be able to hear his cry for help. No one was there to hold his hand, to comfort him, or to save his life. He was alone, but God is helping us through this. The person that we trusted to serve and protect did not. Nouman Raja has showed us who he is.
After we became police officers, I went to the city of Revere Beach, and he went to the city of Atlantis. Revere Beach wasn't as easy to work for, monetary-wise and many other reasons. And there were times I would lose my willingness to want to work and lose my drive, and I would call him, and he would remind me of my oath. And he would always tell me, hey, polish your badge in the morning so you remember what you're doing and why you're doing it. I'm a better person because he's my brother.
Raja's captivating. Within 5 minutes of you knowing him, you are family. He's quick with jokes, has a smile that never quits, no matter what life throws his way. Positive beyond reason, incredibly smart. In our circle of friends, he's the organizer, the cook, the babysitter, the paramedic, the DJ, the Trivial Pursuit master, the protector. His kindness is not only privy to those close friends. Oftentimes it spills over to complete strangers in need.
All right, once the statements were over, Vinnie, the judge delivered his sentence to Nouman Raja.
As I've already adjudicated Mr. Raja previously, on count 1, I hereby sentence him to 25 years in the Department of Corrections. And on count 2, I hereby sentence Mr. Raja to 25 years in the Department of Corrections. That is as a minimum mandatory, which was required that he serve day for day. Those sentences will run concurrently.
Many of those families that there's hope for America, because a jury here in Palm Beach, Florida, looked at all the evidence and they said a black man killed by the police can get equal justice, can get fair administration of the law.
As you heard, Vinnie, the sentences will run concurrently, and Raja, who had been on house arrest, was taken into custody and will have to serve, as you heard there, the minimum of 25 years, day for day. Now, after the trial, you saw there Benjamin Crump, who was representing the Jones family. Later in the press conference, he evoked the names of young black men killed in publicized confrontations with police up to that point in time: Michael Brown in Ferguson, Philandro Castile in Minnesota, Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Crump represented all of those families, and of course, Crump would go on to represent the families of Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and George Floyd.
All right, so convicted, 25 years, but the case not over.
No, it's not over, Vinnie. There is an appeal going on right now. Raja is currently challenging his conviction. Now, in an appeal filed in April of 2020, Raja says the judge made a reversible error when he didn't let the jury consider whether Raja was in the act of making an arrest when the shooting took place, which would have afforded him a much more forgiving standard for use of force. Police are given much more leeway, Vinnie, to use force, which is what makes them so hard to prosecute. The judge sided with prosecutors who claim that Raja was not making an arrest and therefore shouldn't be given the benefit of the protections afforded police under such circumstances. The defense says that the judge should have let the jury decide the issue of whether Raja's actions that day should have been interpreted as an arrest. Instead, Raja was forced to use a regular self-defense argument, which the prosecution undercut because the audio in the tape made him seem like the aggressor. So here's how some of that argument went on March 1st of this year in the 4th District Court of Appeals. Raja is represented by Stephen Malone, and the state response is by Melinda Malier. Listen.
What happened here, just from the recording, that was stitched together from both the 911 call and the AT&T call that Mr. Jones was on during the events. You'll see that Officer Raja at the time says, get your effing hands up. He says drop, and then the shooting started after that. So this court's decisions are pretty plain, at least in Peraza, that you don't have to hold up a Miranda card to be telling someone they're under arrest.
It's the state's position with regard to the giving of the instruction that there was no evidence of making an arrest, period, zero. And I point out that, again, the only evidence that the defense has to look at with regard to the idea that there was some kind of making an arrest is the defendant's statement. And in that statement, it was very clear that when the appellant walked around the front of his van to where Corey Jones was standing, he claims that the gun was suddenly pointed. He said, and I quote, and this is on pages 1,944 to 1,945. The defendant said, he did not know how he drew his gun so quickly that his training kicked in and it went from a broken down car to holy F, I'm going to die. And he said that he reacted immediately. He also said in his statement that it happened so quickly that he thought the victim was going to kill him. When the victim pointed the gun, he just remembered pulling the trigger. There is absolutely nothing in that statement that suggests that he was in the process of making an arrest or that he was going to arrest for the pointing of the weapon by the alleged.
Now, a second issue being raised by Raja is the use of the initial provocation instruction. At trial, the judge gave the jury instructions that if they found that Raja was the initial aggressor, then they could take that into account when considering his self-defense claim, essentially vitiating the entire defense, Vinnie. Now, on appeal, Raja is arguing this was an error because it is the police's job to be initial aggressors when they go and arrest someone, and the instruction should not have been given to the jury. The appeals court is expected to rule in this case later this year, and I spoke to a couple of legal experts, and they think it has a fairly good chance of succeeding, which could lead to a new trial. Now, Raja is currently housed in state prison in Ocala, Florida, with a listed release date of February 2044.
Yeah, some interesting appellate issues, and obviously we'll keep tracking that because if he goes back to trial, Court TV's there. Michael Ayala, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.